please welcome the panel on Lessons for Retirement Success, moderated by Director of Milken Institute Finance, Cheryl Evans.
Oh, cushy chair.
That's down there.
All right.
So thank you for staying in the room. We can't be as entertaining as Peyton. We'll do our best. I don't know if we can throw a lot of jokes into retirement planning, but it's an important topic, and Peyton touched upon a few interesting things. So I lead our Lifetime Financial Security Program, which is focused on everyone being financially secure throughout their lives and into retirement. And that means that we focus on many topics. A primary topic is retirement planning and savings, other things like early wealth building, the financial security of women, the impact of fintech and innovative solutions on retirement, global pension issues and global financial security, and much more. So as there's been an increasing focus, particularly in the financial news and by CEOs, on retirement planning over the past few years, which we see as a good thing. Some of this stems from what experts are referring to the looming or even the current retirement crisis, as we have an increases in longevity and aging population. Those two things come together and are making an impact. In fact, this year is one of the 3-year time periods. It's in that time period, which experts are calling peak 65, when the most boomers are turning 65. And across OECD countries, if you live to be 65, there's a very high chance you'll live about 19.7 more years. And 1 in 6 people in the world will be over age 60 by 2030. So it's an important topic, and today we're going to be focusing on advice and new approaches to retirement planning, and we'll be discussing some key factors related to planning that many people may not have considered. And this will apply to individual savers who may not know a lot about retirement savings, those who know quite a bit but want to tweak their saving plan and do better, and then those that are working in the industry, institutions, employers. So it's a broad audience, and we're lucky to have a wonderful panel of experts. And I'll have each one just introduce themselves, say where they're from, and we'll start our dialogue. So go ahead, Christine.
Sure. Christine Benz. I'm Director of Personal Finance and Retirement Planning at Morningstar. Morningstar is an investment research firm, and I focus on portfolio construction and have gotten very interested in the topic of retirement decumulation and wrote a book called How to Retire that was published last year.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Lee. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer of the New York State Teachers Retirement System. We're a $145 billion defined benefit plan serving 455,000 members and beneficiaries.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Eric Stevenson, and I'm President of Nationwide Retirement Solutions. And we manage about $220 billion, about 3.5 million participants. And really excited that you all chose to stay even 1 minute after Peyton is gone, so we appreciate that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Tataconda. I'm the head of strategy for Athene. Athene is the insurance company that is part of Apollo Global Management and makes up about half of the assets that Apollo manages.
So I think we wanted to start out with sort of the big picture and then zoom into individuals. So where are we in the U.S. regarding retirement savings at this point in time? What's the macro picture? What are the structural issues? So why don't you each just comment briefly sort of on your big picture thoughts on where we are in the system, and then we'll get into some more pointed questions. So we'll start with Christine.
Sure. The word I would use is bifurcated. So we have many individuals who are quite undersaved relative to what they will need for retirement. They will be reliant exclusively on Social Security. They may not have had access to any sort of retirement savings program, which applies, unfortunately, to about half of our population today. And then on the other hand, you have people who are quite well off with respect to their retirement wherewithal, where they have had access to good quality retirement savings vehicles. They've taken good advantage of them. They'll get nice benefits from Social Security. And incidentally, when you look at the data on who is able to work longer, so past the traditional retirement age of 65, it is, generally speaking, the wealthier people, oftentimes working because they want to continue working. So bifurcated is the word that I would use to describe the situation currently, Cheryl.
Thanks. And Tom, tell us what you think about the big picture.
Sure, Cheryl. For our members, a teacher who has served a career in the classroom, being an educator, is guaranteed a lifetime income. So after a full year career in the classrooms, they are guaranteed this income no matter how long they live. So we have a current member who's 107 years old. So that member never has to worry that she won't receive a benefit check at the end of the month.
Yeah, I would use two words. I would say at best, our retirement system is incomplete. At worst, I'd say it's broken. And what do I mean by that? Incomplete in the sense that everyone in this room, right? You know, you either own companies or you're senior executives at your companies and major influencers in those firms. And I say incomplete in that we've done a great job in our firms of helping people save for retirement. I say a great job, a good job. The average American has about $100,000 in their 401k plan, so that ain't going to go very far. But when I say broken, and that it was built on sort of the three-legged stool. We've all talked about it and heard about it, but that three-legged stool has only got one leg left, right? So pensions, people starting work today, less than 10% will have a pension. So that was a big part of the stool. What's the second part of this stool? Social Security. For those of you that heard Elon Musk here, whether you agree or not, he mentioned he thought that Social Security is going to run out in the next 8 years, less than a decade. You can debate that, but you know it's pressured. So all that's left really is what people do in 401k and what they do on their own. And if you've got $100,000, what you can't do is you can't lose when you retire. So think about that. And so we have put all this responsibility on the average American to go figure out how to make $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 last for the rest of their life. That's just ridiculous. They can't do it, but yet we have solutions to do that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we, in the private sector, go back and really help people do a better job of making what they do have last for a lifetime?
Thanks. Go ahead, and Rebecca.
To build on that, I think what American workers want is exactly what Tom gives. They want a paycheck that they can rely on for the rest of their life that is going to pay their bills. And I think what Eric's saying is exactly right. Like, let's do the math. So the average DC participant, defined contribution participant, at retirement has $250,000 saved. They have to turn that into a paycheck. They don't know how to do that. If they go to ChatGPT or ask an advisor, they'll tell them about this 4% safe withdrawal rule. That would be $850 a month. That's really not going to satisfy anybody's retirement needs. There are guaranteed solutions which can help them increase that amount and spend more with confidence for the rest of their life. But in today's DC ecosystem, those are not readily available to folks. And that's really what we're really passionate about, is how to bring the solutions that are needed to get people back to something closer to what Tom offers, but for the rest of the folks that are really relying upon defined contribution and not defined benefit.
And that 4% number was based on when people were living to 75.
Right.
If you're going to live to 100 and you take 4% off of that, it's less than that. So the math fundamentally doesn't work. But anyway, Cheryl, I bet you've got another question before I keep going, don't you?
Yeah, well, you have a lot to say, but we're going to get into the guaranteed income solutions, which I think is a key factor. In fact, we just put out a paper and consulted with Nationwide and others on the significance of in-plan income. It's called Enhancing Retirement, Advancing Lifetime Income Solutions. You can find that online. So with that as background, let's start with some individual savers and just addressing some of the advice that Christine gives, and others, we will have advice too, who may not be that far along in their retirement journey, and also those, as I alluded to at the beginning, who may not feel fully comfortable. They're saving, but maybe they don't have enough. So Christine, you frequently research, write about, and discuss, and everyone here does that type of work, but Christine, you're really particularly focused on individual savers. And you listed your book, so I was going to plug it, but it's called How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. So you talk about two things that were of interest to me, visualizing your life and laying the groundwork for retirement. So tell us what you mean by those two topics and those two notions.
Sure. So the idea of visualizing retirement is something that isn't familiar to many people. I think, unfortunately, because of the way we work in the US, many people show up in retirement quite burned out, and they haven't really been able to visualize what retirement might be like beyond kind of vacation. And that's fine. Everyone needs more time to relax probably than they had while they were working. But I do think it's important for people as they approach retirement to think about some of the advantages that work did confer. So for many of us, work confers a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, and this is especially true in kind of high status professions in our society. But for many of us, it burnishes our own sense of identity. And then importantly, relationships. When we step away from work, and the data suggests that this is a particularly problematic spot for men, that when we step away from work, we're oftentimes stepping away from some important social contacts. And unless we're preemptive about where we will go to replace them post-retirement, oftentimes someone will end up having sort of an unsatisfactory retirement. And then in terms of laying the groundwork for retirement, as I've researched retirement, I've come to be a huge fan of the phased retirement, where you are easing into retirement very gradually. The hard stop is not a good model. So to the extent that people can, I would say post-age 50, start thinking about, well, what are the aspects of this work that I would like to hang on to? And what are the aspects of this work that I really want to get away from? So on my desk at home, I have a stop doing list, where literally there are activities that I'm asked to do that maybe my employer wants me to keep doing that I do not enjoy anymore. And so my plan is to kind of stealth step away from them, or maybe not so stealth because I've said it in a live forum on a couple of occasions. But the phasing into retirement, I think, is a beautiful model, and that is a great way to lay the groundwork for retirement. Some people might say, I have no interest in any of these activities that I do at work, which is fine, make a complete break. But for many of us, I think kind of tiptoeing into retirement is the right model.
And so that really covers your personal choices and how you're going to live your life. And then as we turn back to the financial aspects of retirement, I'm going to ask Christine another question, then have you all weigh in on some related points. You've also written about your individual retirement style and planning the financial portion. So tell us what that is. And I know Wade Pfau has discussed that. So that's a different way to approach your savings model, is it not?
It is. So the two extremes that Wade Pfau discusses in his retirement planning guidebook, which is kind of like the Mac Daddy of retirement books, in my opinion, he talks about how we're all geared a little bit differently with respect to what we want from retirement cash flows. And so many people do indeed want the safe, steady paycheck that pensions afford, that you could get with sort of a fixed payout annuity. Many people say, yes, line that up for me, even if it means that my money won't grow as much. I'm okay with that. I want that paycheck equivalent in retirement. Other folks might say, well, actually, I want to have control over my funds in retirement. I know it won't provide me the longevity protection. It's not guaranteed to last throughout my lifetime, but I want more control over my funds. And so those are the two extremes, would be sort of the total return portfolio that you continue to manage and spend from, or the income annuity or the pension type payout. Many people are kind of a hybrid where you say, well, I probably want a little bit of both. I would say I land there, where I want some funds that I can control, but I also want some guaranteed income. So I think it's a great way for people to approach this topic, where it's not one size fits all. Some financial advisors are sort of like, I just do it this way. Everyone gets this same version of a retirement plan. That's not a great way to go about it. We all psychologically want something a little bit different, and the best plans help address that.
And that sort of touched on what Peyton said about adjusting your plans, right? In football and in life, oftentimes you need to adjust based on what happens. And also, many of us need to, there's a personalization aspect to this. And I know, Eric, you and others have written about and discussed focusing on your cost. When you're thinking about making your own personal plan and personalizing it, there are primary costs. I don't know if you want to touch on that people really need to focus on early on, right?
Yeah. Well, I've been in the business 19 years, and I never thought I'd be on a panel where we're talking about what Peyton Manning said about retirement plans, but we'll go with it. So he was here, we'll work with it. But yeah, so what we talk about, and a number of you are probably talking about this as well, is we know when you retire, when associates in our firms retire, they're going to still have housing costs, food costs, medical costs. And what we recommend in terms of maybe a little bit of what you were saying, Christine, how to bifurcate that is, at a minimum, we ought to be trying to guarantee that for them. If we can at least, and that's going to be 35% of their pre-retirement income. So whatever that number is, at least let's make sure that's guaranteed. And what does that do for the country? At least we know that those folks aren't going to end up in a really, really bad position. Then they can be more aggressive with the rest of their assets, and then hopefully generate more alpha, more return from that. One of the things I've heard, I've been here for 2 days, like many of you, and there've been a lot of pot shots at the government, right? The federal government about what we do and what they don't do. And I think for those of you who heard Elon, I think he made the comment that the federal government is like the DMV at scale, right? I'd never heard that before. But one of the things they do really well is the federal government gets this need, and that this system is broken, and they are really working on both sides of the aisle to help come up with solutions. Folks in this room are aware of Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0, but a big piece of that legislation was creating the space and the safe harbor and some of the regulations that allow us to deliver guarantees inside of retirement plans. And my ask of all of you is, when you go back to your firms, go ask your CHRO or the person who's in charge of that, why don't we at least make one of these options available? People still get to choose, but if we don't make those available, they can't choose these solutions and opportunity to have guaranteed income. And so, you come here, we're here for 2 or 3 days. That's the one thing that we can all do, is go push that and make sure that's an opportunity. If the federal government says it's a good idea, we all think it's a good idea. And the other part is, these solutions are so efficient compared to what you can get in a retail annuities. And by the way, we sell a lot of retail annuities. I'm not knocking that. That's a huge piece. But delivering this inside a retirement plan now, they're more efficient. They have better governance, and they're available to the 60% of people who don't have advisors. Most Americans don't have an advisor. They need these kinds of guaranteed solutions that we have built. And just one last point, you can touch on this, Rebecca, is last year, Senator Sanders, as part of the chair of the HELP Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, hosted a session on, his idea was, how can we bring pensions back? And what we said when I was there, and we said, well, sir, with all due respect, that's never going to happen. But the private sector has come up with really good substitutes for that we take. Now the plan sponsor doesn't have to carry all that risk on the balance sheet, but we'll do that for them, and we can still give that same guarantee to the participants. So it's there for the taking. We just got to get people to engage.
And to build on this and go back to Christine, I think there are better solutions now than ever that address the trade-off that many people have historically seen, but I think is really going away, which is this trade-off between controlling my money and still having access to growth, which, if there's going to be inflationary environments, if you're going to live a long time, you do not want to lock in a low paycheck, because that will be a problem for you. You need to maintain some access to equities and growth. And people want to maintain access to liquidity. And historically, a lot of guaranteed solutions, that was the trade-up, but that is no longer the case. Nationwide, Athene have built our business on liquid, indexed, and guaranteed to your life products, and we now are bringing them in a format that works in today's target date funds. I think, why do we have a target date fund that gets us to 65 with a bunch of money and then says the job is done? We need target income funds which carry people through their lives, but they have to have characteristics. They have to be liquid, they have to be controllable, or you can never default somebody into it. And so that's what I'm most excited about, that Nationwide and Athene and others are doing, is bringing solutions that don't have those trade-offs.
And that's a really important point. We've sort of jumped ahead from the individual investors to the products, but let Tom, you manage one of the nation's largest pension funds. I read that you have about 145 billion, distributing 8 billion a year, and maybe 450,000 members. Tell us a little about your pension funds, and we're going to sort of compare those because that's sort of the opposite. Because government workers have pensions to a much larger extent than we have. The majority of Americans do not, and so they're going to need those lifetime income. But tell us a little about your pension fund and who you cover and what are the benefits, and that kind of is comparable to looking at the lifetime income products.
Sure. So our pension fund covers educators and administrators. And I think one of the aspects that a defined benefit has that is additional to retirement security is we also provide death and disability benefits, right? So a member of our system, if the unfortunate disability occurs, there's a disability coverage. If a death occurs, there's a death coverage insurance. But most of all, I think the fact that by having years of service, you're saving for retirement. So you may be making contributions. In our fund, the contributions range from 3% onward to based on the salary. But we're well funded, 99% funded.
Congratulations.
So the question is, is the taxpayer paying the majority of the benefits? And I would say that from 1994 to 2024, a 30-year period, the member and the employers paid about $40 billion. Investment returns generated about $220 billion. We paid out $145 billion. $150 billion in benefits, but yet our fund grew from $45 billion to $145 billion.
Yeah.
So I think that was like reinforcing it. So
yes, definitely.
So a well-managed public pension plan can provide lifetime income, be well-funded, and not put the burden on the taxpayer, and be a perpetual vehicle. So I think those elements are elements that our colleagues are trying to replicate.
Exactly.
For folks who may not have a DB plan. But I'm an advocate for DB plans for those aspects. But I also understand that not all employers or some public pension plans choose that route. But the bottom line is we should all be worried about retirement security. It does not matter because hopefully all of us will get old. And hopefully all of us, when we get old and are vulnerable, will have a source of income that we can rely on to give us the quality of life that we have worked so hard for.
And that's an important point. Old age. As I get older, I realize it's a privilege denied to many, and so I'm comfortable saying my age. For example, I may not say it on the stage at this moment, but I generally talk about it. But I will say that I'm a baby boomer, just on the edge. But Tom, when we spoke a while ago, and we've all talked about this, you talked about the importance of time as an asset in saving, and you all have that same view, that thinking of that as an asset. And young people have time on their side, and they need to take advantage of that time and invest early. And then I'd like to get a little bit more into the in-plan income products. But you highlighted that there's no magic bullet, but time is the closest thing we have, I think, to a magic bullet as we're thinking about this. And when we wrote our really broad landscape piece 2 years ago, the thing that got the most media attention was just a simple chart that we got from the National Institute on Retirement Research on the power of compounding. If you save $400 a month for 40 years, you're going to have over $1.1 million. So if anyone wants to share their thoughts on the importance of time and the power of compounding, I mean, people need to get that and they need to understand that, I think. I don't know if there's more to say other than that.
No, I would say time is really an asset, but in order to compound, you have to have a systemic way of contributing. So you cannot be taking holidays throughout your working life. You should consistently contribute to your 401k or a deferred comp plan, and you should not tap into it, right? So those are the two things, because the compounding of doing that, contributing consistently and not tapping into it, is very different than the compounding effect of sporadically contributing or not contributing at all for long periods of time. So hopefully that's some education that we can provide our members. And we're fortunate that we have a defined benefit plan, but also many of our members have a deferred comp plan that they can put additional money for the rainy day.
The one home run in the retirement planning space over the past couple decades was ushered into law with the Pension Protection Act in 2006, which enabled auto enrollment into an age-appropriate investment vehicle, the nudge research that just sort of said, can we sort of push people to do the right thing and they'll keep doing it? Well, it really works. It's a success story. So I think the question is, like, how can we take the great nudge research and move that into the retirement decumulation realm? Are there smart defaults that if people just do nothing, but they have some sort of sane savings plan, can we help them? That's the next, I think, generation of making retirement better.
And when you talk about nudge, we're talking about Richard Thaler's work primarily with Daniel Kahneman sort of behind that on just nudging people gradually. We have auto enrollment. People tend to defer to that auto escalation. They sometimes have to opt out, and so we talk about that. I feel like the next step in employer plans is the in-plan income that we're highlighting. And the majority of Americans are going to save through an employer-sponsored plan or their own IRA. So I have a pension from the federal government, but not many people do. So let's talk a little more about the DC plans. We have target date funds. They can serve a purpose. I know, Rebecca, you thought that we should have target income funds, right? Tell us about that. And I'd like you and Eric to tell us a little more about the in-plan income products that you offer and how they're structured and what options they give people.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll start with, there's a bit of a focus right now on what I feel like is a unfortunate path to steer people down, because I don't think it's going to be successful, which is people have worked in a system which has not required them to be highly engaged.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that wrong? It is what it is. And exactly as has been said, the good stuff just happens for them. They're enrolled, they're escalated, and they're put into a target date fund that adjusts their asset classes and makes asset selections for them. And now they get to this critical moment, and we're asking them to make a big decision on their own. If they had an advisor, we have advisory businesses, huge fan of advisors. I have one myself. People that have advisors feel more prepared for retirement and live longer, right? So that is great. 40% of employers offer access to an advisor today, and only 10% of those people that have access to those advisors take it up. Why? Some data says 80% of people are actually scared who don't have an advisor, scared to talk to an advisor because they're either worried they're too expensive, or I think this is a big one, at least if I think about my family growing up, they're scared of what that advisor would tell them if they went, which is that you're unprepared, you need to spend more, save more and spend less, right? So we're not going to solve, employers, I don't think you're going to solve that overnight. And so setting up a system, which is where the industry is looking right now, to say, okay, now you're going to be, not have an advisor, you're going to be your own financial advisor. You may be limited financial literacy, but you're going to have to solve this incredibly complex Rubik's Cube and solve this, and then move your money into an illiquid vehicle that you can't undo. It's just not going to succeed, right? And those solutions are coming to market. If they do, that's fantastic. Prove me wrong. But I think we need the auto income solution that does no harm to anyone, just like the target date fund. If you're defaulted into it, you have a higher risk tolerance, lower risk tolerance, you can trade out of it the next day and put your money where you want. And so we need to have an auto income solution with that same flexibility. If you just go with that solution, you're going to get access to institutionally priced, vetted, guaranteed income solutions, but you're not giving up any liquidity to do that. If we can do that, I think we can solve this retirement in a pretty fast way. Yeah. What do you think, Eric?
There's a piece to me that just doesn't make sense, right? So everyone's talked about it, that Social Security, the way it works, it worked, right? In terms of the person contributes and employer contributes and the savings, and it's there. Pensions, they work. Tom is, a great example. They do work. Employee contributes, the company contributes, and there's money that lasts for a lifetime. But the participant had to do almost nothing. We talked about auto-enroll, auto-escalate. They work. So why in the world, what's the friction around doing the same thing for turning that into income? Like, why does that not work? Everything we've described works except when we get to that. So there's some obvious friction in the system that we just have to be honest about. And it's controversial, but part of that friction in the system is how do people get paid? And we've got to solve for that, and we can't let that drive the conversation for what's best for America and best for Americans. That can't be the reason that we don't do it, is because I don't know how to get paid from doing it. When we've got the solutions that you said are institutionally managed, institutionally priced, and deliver that income for life. And the other part of the friction is this whole thing around just our plan sponsors. Think about the folks in the firms that got to make these decisions to add these solutions. It's a big decision for them. They don't understand it. So we've got to also make it simple and make it easy for them to engage. But we do need to do something, and just sort of waiting until we say that everybody wants it. No participant ever asked for a pension like before they ever heard of it, or asked for these things. So that's not going to happen. We're going to have to introduce these and help guide people there, or we're going to have a crisis, a bigger crisis than we have now. And you talked about the time. People. A great asset is time. Well, it's a great asset if you're young.
Right.
It's not a great asset if you're 50 years old and you got $100,000. You got a problem. Time is against you at that point.
And Christine, you wanted to add something.
I did, which is that another friction I would add is that we are a nation of job hoppers, where the typical person has 12 jobs, so people aren't showing up in retirement with a single retirement account with their current employer. They have little pots of money all over the place. And so I think something that I wish would be in one of these retirement packages of legislation would address this leakage that happens when people move from employer to employer, that would make it simpler to transfer money to a single consolidated retirement savings vehicle, because that is a huge logistical pain point for many people at retirement. And it also complicates matters for the plan sponsor, the person who's in charge of the retirement plan. They don't know what they're looking at. They have a pot of money with that employer. It may be a tenth of what the person has. It may be all they have. They don't know. And so that is, I think, a failing in our system, that people do have retirement savings all over the place because we tether it to their employment.
And we've considered that, the notion of portability, creating a better network so that plans can be easily moved, because we've seen research, and many of you have done the research showing that when people move jobs, they often liquidate and they don't keep that money in the plan. I think one of the things Eric's talking about, when he says plan sponsors, for those of you in the room who don't really know the language, those are the people putting together the plan, but they're also generally large employers. There can be small employers as well. So they're trying to make that decision, the HR person who may not know a great deal. And when we were thinking about these products, I can say from the Milken Institute's, nonpartisan, not affiliated with a financial firm perspective, we think there need to be some changes, as we highlighted in our paper. And one of those is educating plan sponsors a little more. Educating the public, we gathered a number of financial firms and retirement experts and thought about these issues. And I don't think the average person would say they need lifetime income. It's sort of, what is lifetime income and why do I need it? So how can we educate? How can we call this an asset class? Because we at Milken believe it's its own asset class, really, because an asset class is something, as we wrote about, that has the same characteristics, that performs the same over in the markets over time and in similar circumstances. So that's one thing. And then we have some concerns about excessive litigation when their plan changes. And frankly, that's an impediment to employers taking this up. They're afraid to be sued. And these products, I think, and Milken does overall, can be a game changer for people to have that lifetime income. We know that Social Security is inflation protected, but it's small, and the average person gets about $19.75, I think, in 2025 a month. We don't want people living on that, trying to live on that. So these guaranteed income solutions are really key. And so we really want to highlight that. And we'd love for people to really realize, like, I need guaranteed income. I have a pension, for example. If you project even a small pension out 25,000 years, say, you project that out over 30 years, that's a huge chunk of money that you're going to have. guaranteed. So to us, it's a really important plan. And then we also wanted to think a little about longevity. Research and retirement planning. Nationwide, Eric, you've in Nationwide has done quite a bit of research on increases in longevity, and I don't know if you want to highlight some of your thoughts on that research you've done in that space.
Sure. Just that, like we talked about people kind of, where we are now, life expectancy was around 15 years, 18 years after retirement, so right, early mid-80s. And now that we're saying, like, over the next decade, it's going to quadruple the number of people who are living to 100. And whether you make it to 100 or not, that additional time back to, is time on your side or not, makes a huge difference in terms of how much you have access to. So we really do have to be just much more aggressive around these solutions. And I think that's what when I talk about the federal government, I think that's what they're seeing, is that this thing is bubbling up in a way that we've got to take action. And maybe, Rebecca, if you would, we've got a few minutes left. I think it'd be interesting to talk about how we're asking some of these folks here to go out and engage with their firms. Yeah. What do these products look like? Like, start to describe some of the folks who don't know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So Nationwide and Athene are together in one product. We have an asset manager partner, State Street is in the product. We have Global Trust Company is the trustee, and then we provide the guarantee inside of it. And it is what we're talking about is this real next generation target date fund. So it looks, smells, tastes, work like a target date fund. It's just part of your plan lineup. It's built to be the QDIA, and you can default people's money into it. The magic happens is that there is a guaranteed solution embedded inside of that. For any insurance nerds in here, it's an indexed annuity with a lifetime withdrawal benefit. You don't need to understand anything I said, except that that's inside, and that's kind of the secret sauce. And when the participant turns 65, they start to get a monthly paycheck. The goodness happens automatically without them doing anything. And that paycheck comes out at 6% of the highest amount that target date fund has ever achieved. So if you retire in a down market, you're going to get the high water mark from 2 years ago. So you're building up your assets over time. We're locking in these high water marks. And on your entire balance, that $250K, for example, you get to 65 and a paycheck starts. Instead of that paycheck being $850, which it would be at the 4% withdrawal rate, it's going to be $1,100 at a 6% withdrawal rate. And we're going to pay that out to you as long as you live. If you live a very long time, and depending on market circumstances, there's a chance in your 90s it could drop down to 4.5%. It can never go below 4.5%. So your 4% safe withdrawal rate, maybe. We're doing 4.5% guaranteed, but based on the expected performance of all of the assets, we think that we can pay you 6% for most of your life. And what we find when we look at retirees and back to what do they want to do, they want to travel, they want to spend time with their grandkids, they want to do things in the first decades of their retirement. And most people's desire for spending, other than long-term care, critical illness at the end of life, people are happy to take a little bit less at the end for more in the beginning. So that's it's a target date fund. It's really a target income fund. It delivers paychecks to participants. They don't have to do anything. But again, if they don't like it, they sell out any day of the week before retirement or after, and they take their money out, and they can move it wherever they want.
And just one other piece to that, and that sounds like, boy, that must be really expensive because people are thinking annuities and traditional annuities. Well, that target date fund, before you're in payout, is what, 9%?
9%.
I'm sorry, 9%.
9%. 9 basis points.
9%. I'm like, we're going to go now. We're done. But 9 basis points, and it goes to 20 when you're in payout. So there are actively managed target date funds that you can't get for that number total without a guarantee. Think about that. Yeah. So I go back to what's the friction? Why are we not offering this in every plan? It doesn't make sense to me.
And this addresses the two issues that we've written about, which is 2 points. Most people are more afraid or their primary fear in retirement is outliving their money, as most people in the room would agree. And research shows they're more afraid of that than death. And that kind of goes into public speaking, but we're okay here with public speaking. And then it also addresses the flip side of that, which is the retirement consumption puzzle that experts talk about, which is that people are so afraid that they're not spending the money that they could to live fully in their early retirement years in particular, when they may want to do more things. So, and the research by David Blanchett and others shows that people are more likely to spend from a guaranteed stream of income. So we don't want people to outlive their money, but we don't want them to not live fully in retirement and have worked for years and years and be so afraid to hang on to that money. So that guaranteed income addresses that, both of those things, which I found to be really interesting when I started looking at this. And we were touching upon longevity. Tom and others here, Tom, you highlighted in our discussion the fact that women live longer than men. And tell us a little about what you're seeing, and women have an increased longevity risk, essentially. Yes. We can talk about addressing that briefly.
Absolutely. So over 80% of our members are females. And, you know, Eric mentioned the folks who are getting past 100. We have over 250 members who are over 100.
Wow. And
that number just keeps growing. So really the longevity risk is a key risk for a participant. And fortunately for ours, the DB plan provides income until they pass away. And another aspect is that you can also designate a beneficiary. So if you are a participant, you can designate a beneficiary that will also receive a lifetime benefit for as long as the beneficiary lives. So I think the longevity issue is a huge one. And, you know, I tell my team, I had a town hall meeting, and I just asked everybody to close their eyes. And I said, imagine that you're 90 years old and you have an income every month. Remember that feeling. And then I said, close your eyes. Imagine you're 90 years old and you don't know where the next paycheck's coming from. And unfortunately, many Americans may be faced with that feeling, which is not a good feeling.
And that's a very powerful thing, visualization. We wrote about that as well in one of our papers, highlighting the fact that people sometimes don't connect to their future self. That ties into that. It's too far away. I often say that I didn't save as much as I could have. And so sometimes we tell people to think of it as two different people. You're saving for you. You're saving for the old you. Maybe it's old Cheryl or old. So that's kind of interesting. But what unique impediments do women face in long-term saving? Christine, you've talked a little about that, and you highlighted a couple of interesting points when we were speaking.
Yeah, the income gap explains most of women's shortfall with respect to retirement readiness, that women do tend to earn less over their lifetimes, and that owes mainly to caregiving for children, for their children, and also for adult parents, for elderly parents, that adult daughters are the biggest provider of long-term care in this country. And so those two things take a toll on women's ability to save for retirement. There has also been documented a tendency of women to be a little more conservative than their male counterparts. The nice thing is some of that is being solved with target date funds being the opt-in vehicle, that to the extent that women are sort of indirectly asking for advice with those target date funds, they're getting age-appropriate asset allocations, and we're tending to see more appropriate asset allocations for women. So those are a couple of the challenges. Long-term care risk, because women do have an edge of a couple of years on their male counterparts, is also something that women need to address in their retirement plans.
You made an interesting point when we were talking. You highlighted the need for young women to go full force on their career in the first 10, 15 years or so, because they may be out of the workforce. Is that your notion?
Absolutely, yeah. Because when you look at the data, women are crushing it with respect to college graduation, early career salaries, and so it's the caregiving that is taking the toll, that when they step away from work or decrease their work, and some women don't do that at all, but many women do, that does impinge upon their ability to save. So the only thing I can conclude from that is that in those early years in the workforce, to the extent that women can really get the message about saving aggressively during those years, it just gives them more power throughout their lifetimes. And certainly it gives them more money in the end at retirement.
And we would be remiss if we didn't highlight the current market volatility, the situation we're in. Markets are up or down. Many people are frightened. Individual investors have lost money. We can't really gloss over it and say it any other way. There's uncertainty, clearly, at a minimum, in the markets. What do we all have to say about market volatility and how people should think about it? It's a tough question to answer, I understand, but I feel like we should, give people some thoughts on the current environment and how to think about their long-term planning. So whoever wants to weigh in, it's tough.
I think it'd be great to hear from Tom, because folks with the pension,
Yeah.
they aren't worried much about the volatility.
No.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why I say time is an asset for a pension fund as an investor, because we can ride out the market volatility.
Yeah.
Because our investment horizon is forever. Unfortunately, for folks who rely on the size of their assets in a limited amount of time, it's purely a random event. Mm-hmm. When you decide to first invest and when you decide to stop investing because you're going to retire. It's purely a random event. And an institutional investor such as a DB pension plan, we eliminate that random event because our investment horizon is forever. So no matter the ups and downs of the market, we can manage it, and the participant is not at risk. So if you could replicate that,
Well, and that's
vehicle, that'd be awesome.
exactly what we have.
Yep.
We've taken that. We're saying we're taking that risk off the participant. They aren't prepared to do that, and so the solutions. And Rebecca talked about they have this the lock-in, and we did some math just in the last 90 days. If you take this volatility and you're at 65, you're panicked right now, right? If you're thinking about retiring and you went through this last 90 days, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But if you had guarantee and you had a locked-in thought, it wouldn't matter to you at all, except for the part that's still invested in equities, which we do want people to stay. The majority of their assets, or a big part of them, are still in equities. But for that part, it's such a good solution. We've taken the best of pensions, or a lot of good of pensions, and developed that in the private sector and making that available. And what I would also share with you, I'm being a little salesy now, I know, but if you go back and ask any of your record keepers, they all have these solutions on their platform. You just have to ask for them. We just have to just ask, is this available to us, and how do we do that? It is there. And if it's not, they can go out and make one phone call to the record keeper and make sure it's available for you.
And maybe the
Christine,
one thing
you
I'll
want-
add on this is people have car insurance, people have home insurance, people have D&O insurance. We are insuring everything except for people's retirement. We need paycheck insurance because, Cheryl, we're talking about two risks, longevity risk and sequence of return risk, retiring at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. Those are risks that are much better pooled and held by companies who are built to hold and manage and pool risks than by put on the individuals. I would be terrified to be driving around LA if there was not required mandatory car insurance.
Yeah. Christine, you wanted to add something. I had like two more questions.
So for people who are managing portfolios, and I think everyone on the panel would agree that most people, even if they have a good degree of guaranteed income, will have some investment assets that they're managing them. I would think, if you're over 50, I would say it's not too late to de-risk a portion of that portfolio. The market has even rebounded a little bit. People have had such a phenomenal experience in equities. I have this discussion all the time about taking some chips off the table in equities, moving them to safer assets where yields are up. You just have to take extra care to mind inflation protection with that fixed income portion of the portfolio. And then for folks under 50, I've just been banging the drum of globalizing that equity portfolio. I remember coming into this year, I was thinking, okay, here again, non-US stocks look cheap relative to US, but what could possibly be the catalyst for non-US stocks to perform well? Well, lo and behold, something comes out of the blue and accentuates the case for managing a global portfolio. So young investors, I think, just using a one and done kind of global portfolio makes a ton of sense, like a total world market index.
And we wanted to just touch upon decumulation really quickly, and then what the future of retirement may look like. So decumulation is the spend down portion, and we could have devoted a whole session to that. We really touched upon it because that's what you're really talking about to a large extent with these products. But what should retirees be considering, particularly those who are managing their own money? Most don't have a pension. I know there's healthcare savings, tax issues. If anyone wants to touch upon a few things you need to consider as you begin to spend down your assets and are no longer really accumulating much. So what are the few of the considerations that people should take into account?
I think we have covered it.
I feel like
my first thought is, I always encourage, like you said, you have an advisor. I have an advisor as well, and probably most of the people in this room do. And I think getting advice is really key. Morningstar, that's something that you take a lot of pride in and do really well. But I think we really have to just keep encouraging the broader population to find a way to get advice, whether that's through a managed account solution, which is very efficient,
that's important,
or actually hiring an advisor.
And we also think that people should be thinking about their healthcare costs, taxes, and then how you're going to take things out in what order. But that goes to the point of having an advisor, I think you're saying, Eric. And then technology is evolving at a breakneck pace. What do we think the future of retirement looks like in 20 years? That's tough to say, but does anyone want to have any thoughts? I think we're going to have more automation, clearly, in a variety of ways. But
So I've seen companies that have trained ChatGPT to pass all of the 6, 63, 7, like that's doable. But if you actually try to ask it a bunch of questions and get advice, it stinks. People are going to probably fix that. So today we have a choice of you kind of do it on your own or use an advisor, and the digital tools in between are limited, right? And especially to get into the complexity of retirement choices. But I would bet that is going to be radically different in 2 years than it even is today, right? ChatGPT, as everybody knows, right, passed the bar, passed the MCAT. Like it is a learning machine, but I think how to make it from being smart into actually providing financial advice is still a pretty big lift.
And I think a lot of people are engaging with online advisors, particularly individuals, but it doesn't always, in my estimation, replicate talking to someone and doing that planning. We wanted to do I think we've kind of covered this, but we just have a couple of minutes. If each of you want to highlight one point related to retirement planning, whether it's a call out to employers, to individuals, or just one thought about what needs to be done or what you think is important. So if you want to go ahead.
Sure. My soundbite is it's not a math problem, that everyone tries to reduce retirement planning to a number. Yes, you need the funds, that's table stakes, but the decision about whether and when to retire is about a lot more than money. It's about purpose, identity, relationships, all of the things I was talking about. So don't reduce it to a math problem.
I would say focus on asset allocation and make consistent contributions.
I would say when I hear plan sponsors say, I feel like it's too much risk to put these solutions in the plan, I would argue that you're taking a bigger risk, you're taking a bigger fiduciary risk by not offering a solution that's that efficient and that effective for your mass population of not offering these.
So I would say if you think about the DC and what we've solved, we're doing a better job with saving. We're not at 12% of Australia, but way better. We're doing a pretty good job of investing those assets, although I know there were most of this conference talking about assets like private credit. I think those belong in target date funds. Mm-hmm. That will be the extra thing we can do to improve the investing phase of it. And then I think that the income phase is very solvable. but we just have to put the solutions in place, and it is going to take everyone here who has a role in your company's plan. Like there are solutions out there, and please don't be intimidated. And I promise not to use any words like FIA with GLWB.
Thank you.
And lastly, I would say the thing that we often say to people who don't know much about finance or aren't saving is turn towards finance, not away, even if it seems scary. And it's never too late to start saving for your future, and you'll never regret it. So thanks so much for joining us today.